The Roman immediate ordinary jurisdiction did not exceed the Roman Patriarchate. It was within those boundaries. But I mean, here is Rome saying for like 50 years, Paulinus, Evagrius, Paulinus, Paulinus, and literally nobody thinks they're doing anything wrong by disagreeing with Rome on this one. So much for that ordinary universal jurisdiction. Boy, do we have some developments to cover today. So, as you guys know, in my last video, I did a very basic review of the current state of Roman Catholicism from the perspective of a traditional Catholic. We talked about these different systems of hierarchies of authority. We covered the Roman Catholic hierarchy of authority and the hierarchy of authority within Holy Orthodoxy. We just barely started scratching the surface of some historical events within the early church, and we saw that the early church did not apply a Roman Catholic hierarchy of authority, they applied the Orthodox hierarchy of authority. One of the most liked comments on that video was from Steady Dividends 571, who said, "We want to see the debate with Joe Heschmeyer, our lawyer versus your lawyer."
Tonight we stand at a crossroads of history. The claims of Rome collapse under their own weight. Papal supremacy was forged centuries after.
I saw it was getting a bunch of likes and I thought it was kind of funny, and I have been waiting for like the right opportunity for a debate to come up anyway, so I pinned it. I screenshot Dividend's comment, I post it to X, Instagram, Facebook, and I get a response from none other than Justin Menard. Not only does he have the greatest smile in all of online orthodoxy, he is also the co-host of the Transfigured Life podcast, which he runs together with Father Jonathan Ivanov. If you're not familiar with the Transfigured Life YouTube channel, their videos discuss all aspects of Orthodox theology. They host interviews, dialogues, monologues, debates, and they host some of the most notable intelligent minds in this Orthodox apologetics work that are trying to bring unbelievers and the heterodox back into the church. Anyway, Justin Menard reaches out to me. He tells me, "Alex, I've already been talking to Joe about working on something together. Would you like me to reach out to him for you?" And of course I said, yes, please, Justin, please reach out to Joe. So as of recording this video, I've talked to Justin and I've talked to Joe. We're pretty close to finalizing things. I don't think we're quite there yet, but as soon as things are finalized, you can expect an official announcement. One thing I can say for sure, I'm pretty sure without getting in trouble, is that don't expect it within the next few weeks here. It's going to be a little while. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Joe. Again, nothing is official yet, but I wouldn't even be having this conversation with Justin and with Joe if it weren't for you guys. And especially thank you to my channel members, to anybody that sent in super chats. You guys are what makes this thing feasible to keep on going. If you guys are new here, thanks again for clicking on this video. My name is Alex. I'm an Orthodox Christian and a lawyer. I enjoy talking about apologetics and theology. As you can probably already tell, we have a very vibrant, interactive community here. I like to try and keep you guys as up to date as possible as I can without getting in trouble. So if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like the video before you leave, subscribe to the channel, and if you can support the channel, as I already mentioned, we have channel memberships open. Channel membership gives you early access to videos like this before anybody else can see them. You get exclusive access to a growing video archive of live streams. Right now we're going through the early church fathers and writings, and you get my own personal notes along with that. You get priority responses to your comments on my videos, and as the channel grows, you get more and more benefits. Housekeeping out of the way, in this video, we're going to be digging deeper into the papacy. Namely, a lot of Western Christians today are hearing about Holy Orthodoxy for the first time, and with this new information, they are reevaluating their Protestant and Roman Catholic beliefs. So in today's video, we're going to get more specific about the papal claims. What exactly are you signing up for if you join Roman Catholicism today? And do those claims, does that hierarchy of authority match the church of the first 1,000 years? Okay, now before we get into the meat and potatoes here, we have to address one thing. I am talking about jurisdiction in this video. In my last video, I was talking about jurisdiction. I am not talking about papal infallibility. Jurisdiction and infallibility are two separate categories. In Pastor Eternus, which is the document from Vatican I that talks about these things, Chapter 3 talks about jurisdiction, Chapter 4 talks about infallibility. I mentioned this in my last video too, yet Bishop Gasser's Relatio keeps on coming up in the comments. Bishop Gasser's Relatio talks about infallibility, not about jurisdiction. These two categories, they are not the same and they are very frequently confused. Remember, jurisdiction refers to boundaries or limits on power. It has nothing to do with the truth value of a teaching. In fact, the truth content of any Roman Catholic teaching is wholly irrelevant here. Even the fallible teachings within the ordinary magisterium of the Roman Catholic Church, the faithful owe a religious submission of intellect and will to those teachings. Where do you find ordinary magisterial teaching? Papal encyclicals, papal bulls. Here's Pope John Paul II's instruction in Donum Veritatis. When the Magisterium, not intending to act definitively, teaches a doctrine to aid a better understanding of revelation and make explicit its contents, or to recall how some teaching is in conformity with the truths of the faith, or finally to guard against ideas that are incompatible with these truths, the response called for is that of the religious submission of the will and intellect. He goes on to say that the willingness to submit loyally to the teaching of the Magisterium on matters per se not irreformable, so matters that can change, this must be the rule. And Pope Pius XII in Humani Generis explicitly mentions papal encyclicals being within the ordinary magisterium of the Church. Nor must it be thought that what is expounded in encyclical letters does not itself demand consent, since in writing such letters, the popes do not exercise the supreme power of their teaching authority. For these matters are taught with the ordinary teaching authority, of which it is true to say, he who hears you hears me. And generally what is expounded and inculcated in the encyclical letters, already for other reasons, appertains to Catholic doctrine. So please use your brains and pay attention. Papal fallibility and infallibility is not directly at issue here. As long as it's within the ordinary magisterial teaching of the Church, the Roman Catholic faithful has to offer submission of will and intellect to that ordinary magisterial teaching, even if it's reformable and changeable. Now that said, this is the Roman Catholic teaching on the jurisdiction of the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. If anyone says that the Roman Pontiff has only the office of inspection and direction, but not the full and supreme power of jurisdiction over the whole Church, not only in matters that pertain to faith and morals, but also in matters that pertain to the discipline and government of the Church throughout the whole world, or if anyone says that he has only a more important part and not the complete fullness of this supreme power, or if anyone says that this power is not ordinary and immediate over each and every church or over each and every one of the shepherds and the faithful, let him be anathema. Please notice that this canon has absolutely nothing to do with the truth content of the teaching of the Pope. This canon is simply describing the extent and reach, limits of his power, which there are no limits. It teaches that the Pope has ordinary and immediate power over the whole Church, not just the whole Church, down to each individual of the faithful. And remember, whenever you hear ordinary, that means religious submission of the will and intellect. And mind you, this is upon the threat of anathema. So if you're a Roman Catholic and you deny that the Roman Pontiff has ordinary, immediate jurisdiction over the whole Church down to each individual faithful, you might as well be cast out of the Church. You're anathema. The ordinary magisterial teachings of the Church are not optional. They require your submission. This seems to be a huge misunderstanding with a lot of Roman Catholics. On this topic, the very well-known Roman Catholic scholar, the Reverend Dr. George D. Smith, says, Catholics are bound to believe what the Church teaches. To refuse the assent of the divine Catholic faith to a dogma is to be a heretic. To refuse the assent of the ecclesiastical faith to a doctrine which the Church teaches as belonging indirectly to the deposit of faith is to be more or less near to heresy. To refuse internal religious assent to the non-infallible doctrinal decisions of the Holy See is to fail in that submission which Catholics are strictly bound to render to the teaching of the authority of the Church. So yes, as a Roman Catholic, you have to submit your will and intellect to the teachings in the papal encyclicals, in the papal bulls. These are not optional teachings. It has nothing to do with fallible or infallible. So now that we have that established, let's go back to the Quartodeciman controversy. Let's see whether Pope Victor has that kind of jurisdiction, that when it comes to faith and morals, disciplinary issues, ecclesiastical issues, that the Pope of Rome has ordinary, immediate jurisdiction over the shepherds of the Church and each of the faithful. Let's go back to Eusebius. Let's review exactly what happened in the Quartodeciman controversy. At that time, no small controversy erupted because all of the Asian dioceses thought the Savior's Paschal festival should be observed according to ancient tradition on the 14th day of the moon on which the Jews had been commanded to sacrifice the lamb. In churches throughout the rest of the world, however, it was not customary to celebrate in this way since, according to apostolic tradition, they maintained the view that still prevails. The fast ends only on the day of our Savior's resurrection, Sunday. Synods and conferences of bishops were held on this issue, and all were of one opinion in formulating the decree for the Church through letters everywhere that the mystery of the Lord's resurrection from the dead should be celebrated on no other day than Sunday, and only on that day should we observe the end of the Paschal fast. Still extant is a letter from those who attended a conference in Palestine with Bishop Theophilus of Caesarea and Bishop Narcissus of Jerusalem presiding, as well as from those who attended a similar conclave at Rome on the issue under Victor as bishop. There are others from the bishops of Pontus, over whom Palmas presided as the senior, from Gaul, over which Irenaeus presided, from Osrhoene and the cities there, from Bacillus, bishop of Corinth, and many more who expressed the same unified opinion and gave the same vote. So Eusebius tells us that outside of this one Asian diocese, the rest of the world, everybody agreed that Easter should be celebrated on Sunday. This includes Saint Irenaeus and Victor. They were of the same opinion on this. Also, how does this not just sound exactly like a metropolitanate, the metropolitan system of bishops? The bishops in Asia, however, who insisted on the custom handed down to them long ago, were led by Polycrates, whose letter to Victor and the Roman Church explains the tradition he had received. So although the rest of the world, Rome, Pontus, Gaul, Palestine, they all agreed that Easter should be celebrated on Sunday. Polycrates, leading this Asian diocese, says no. He says, no, I won't do it. I'm going to maintain the traditions as I've inherited them. And Eusebius even records the end of Polycrates' letter to Pope Victor, and he says, we must obey God rather than men. And you guys know how the rest of the story goes. Pope Victor tried to excommunicate Polycrates and his little coalition of bishops, but then Pope Victor was reprimanded by another coalition of bishops led by Saint Irenaeus. Now let me ask you guys, does that look like Pope Victor had immediate ordinary jurisdiction over Polycrates and those bishops over there in Asia? Did anybody act in such a way to indicate to us that the shepherds owed submission of intellect and will to Pope Victor? Absolutely not. So we know that at least in the 190s AD, these vast unlimited jurisdictional claims that Roman Catholic theology teaches about the Pope of Rome, it wasn't there. Again, you see the same principle at work at the 7th Council of Carthage in the 250s AD between Pope Stephen and Saint Cyprian of Carthage. As you may know, Pope Stephen and Saint Cyprian of Carthage disagreed on the reception of those who were baptized by heretics outside of the church. Let's examine the actions of the church at this time. Did anybody act as if Saint Cyprian owed his submission of will and intellect to Pope Stephen's ordinary jurisdiction? No, he does not. Nobody acts this way. And in fact, at the opening of that 7th Council of Carthage, St. Cyprian says this, "For neither does any of us set himself up as a bishop of bishops, nor by tyrannical terror does any compel his colleague to the necessity of obedience, since every bishop, according to the allowance of his liberty and power, has his own proper right of judgment, and can no more be judged by another than he himself can judge another." So now we're into the late 250s AD. Do we see that the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, has this ordinary immediate jurisdiction over the shepherds of the church and the faithful, such that they have to submit their intellect and will to the teaching of Pope Stephen? No, it wasn't there. This Roman Catholic teaching, a vast jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome, wasn't there. Okay, so let's get on to some newer stuff. Let's move on to the Meletian Schism. Now, the Meletian Schism has a bit of an unfortunate name because it's a bit of a misnomer. Basically, in 361 AD, there was a dispute over who is the proper bishop of Antioch. And you have a split between the major sees. Rome and Alexandria backed Paulinus, Constantinople and everybody else backed Saint Meletius. Now, Saint Basil the Great, in order to heal the schisms within this fractured church, sent letters to Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. These letters are recorded for us as St. Basil's letters 66 and 67. Listen carefully to the language that St. Basil uses to describe the church at Antioch and St. Meletius. He says, "Now what could be more vital to the churches of the world than the church of Antioch? If it came to pass that this church returned to a state of concord, nothing would prevent its affording health in the manner of a sound head to the whole body. The entire East is completely in union with Meletius to see the latter directing the church of the Lord, since he is a man not open to censure as regards his faith, and in respect to his life admits no comparison with the rest, as also in this respect that he stands at the head of the whole body of the church, so to speak, while the residue are, as it were, segments of its limbs. Accordingly, it is for every reason necessary, and at the same time expedient, that all the rest should unite with this man, just as smaller streams unite with mighty rivers." So St. Basil said that the church that is most vital to the churches of the whole world is the church in Antioch, not the church in Rome. St. Basil says that the church in Antioch is the head of the whole body, and St. Meletius is also the head of the body. This is the exact same kind of language that others use for Rome. These kinds of exaggerated honorifics were a dime a dozen back then, and whether they're used for Rome or for Antioch, it doesn't imply more jurisdictional powers. Now, unfortunately, St. Basil was not able to heal the schism. So now we arrive at the year 381, we arrive at the Second Ecumenical Council. Saint Meletius is appointed to preside over that council. Well, hang on a minute. The Roman Catholic teaching is that Saint Peter had universal, immediate, ordinary jurisdiction over all the shepherds of the church and all the faithful of the church ever since our Lord said to him at the end of the Gospel of John, "Feed my sheep." Look, I understand that there may be time required for communication between Rome and the other patriarchates, but that's not what's happening here. What we see is that every patriarchate outside of Rome simply doesn't recognize Roman jurisdiction outside of the Roman patriarchate.
Well, they didn't recognize Roman jurisdiction in the eastern provinces. So Leo's reinstating for them was not decisive. A decision has to be made in the east.
I mean, whatever happened to Rome has spoken, the matter is closed? Well, Rome backed Paulinus, and that matter was far from closed for like another 50 years. St. Meletius reposes during the Second Ecumenical Council, his office not recognized by Rome, not being able to commune together with Rome, and is succeeded by Flavianus. Now, this schism ends up ticking off the emperor who goes to visit the Bishop of Rome. We're told that after a considerable time had elapsed, the emperor arrived at Rome and once more encountered the charges advanced by the bishops on the ground that he was making no attempt to put down the tyranny of Flavianus. The emperor ordered them to set forth the nature of the tyranny, saying that he himself was Flavianus and had become his protector. The bishops rejoined that it was impossible for them to dispute with the emperor. He then exhorted them in future to join the churches in concord, put an end to the quarrel, and quench the fires of a useless controversy. Paulinus, he pointed out, had long since departed this life. Evagrius had been irregularly promoted. The eastern churches accepted Flavianus as their bishop. Not only the East, but all Asia, Pontus, and Thrace were in communion with him, and all Illyricum recognized his authority over the Oriental bishops. In submission to these councils, the Western bishops promised to bring their hostility to a close and to receive the envoys who should be sent to them. So basically, Rome for like 50 years is saying, Paulinus, 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 and the rest of the church is like, no, we think you're wrong. Now we have Flavianus. We're just going to back him. Everybody agrees on it. Rome keeps on saying Paulinus, Paulinus, and then the emperor goes to put them in timeout and they just like change their mind and agreed with everyone else. Roman immediate ordinary jurisdiction did not exceed the Roman Patriarchate. It was within those boundaries. But I mean, here is Rome saying for like 50 years, Paulinus, Evagrius, Paulinus, Paulinus, and literally nobody thinks they're doing anything wrong by disagreeing with Rome on this one. So much for that ordinary universal jurisdiction. Now here's an enormous detail that most people miss. Illyricum was under the Roman Patriarchate at the time. Hold on a minute. Roman Catholic teaching tells me that the Roman pontiff has ordinary immediate jurisdiction over the shepherds of the church and the faithful. How can it be that the dioceses within the Roman Patriarchate even don't submit to Rome? Because the Roman Catholic teaching of the limitless jurisdictional boundaries of the Pope is made up. It didn't exist during the time of the Meletian Schism. Okay, the next jurisdictional claim that Roman Catholics teach about the papacy is that the decisions of the Roman pontiff are not subject to review on the basis that he is the highest authority. Pastor Eternus chapter 3 tells us the judgment of the Apostolic See, whose authority is unsurpassed, is not subject to review by anyone, nor is anyone allowed to pass judgment on its decision. Therefore, those who say that it is permitted to appeal to an ecumenical council from the decisions of the Roman pontiff as to an authority superior to the Roman pontiff stray from the straight path of truth. So again, what do we see there? The Roman See has unsurpassed authority. The decisions of the Roman pontiff are not subject to review by anyone. You have no appeal rights from the decisions of the Roman pontiff. Again, I'm not talking about fallibility or infallibility. This is purely jurisdictional. The decisions of the Apostolic See and the decisions of the Roman pontiff, they are not subject to review by anyone. You have no appeals. Why? Because the Roman See has unsurpassed authority. That is the teaching in Pastor Eternus chapter 3. Let's see if the church in the first few centuries, or in the first 1,000 years, ever acted this way. And you know, you don't have to go that far from the beginning of the church to see that it's simply not true that the decisions of St. Peter were not subject to review. They were subject to review. Just look at the basis for St. James's judgment at the Jerusalem Council. St. James absolutely takes St. Peter's statement and incorporates it into his judgment, but on what basis does he do so? Is it on the basis of St. Peter's authority? No, absolutely not. St. James reviews St. Peter's statement to see if it matches up with the prophets. We're told in Acts chapter 15. And after they had become silent, James answered, saying, "Men and brethren, listen to me. Simon has declared how God at the first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And with this, the words of the prophets agree, just as it is written. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God, but that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from things strangled, and from blood." So we see from the very first council in Scripture in Acts 15 that St. Peter's teachings were subject to review by St. James. So this teaching in modern-day Roman Catholicism that St. Peter, the Apostolic See, is not subject to review by anyone, that's refuted by the very first council you see in the Bible. St. James considers St. Peter's statement on the merits, not on the basis of his authority. Ergo, St. Peter's teachings were subject to review. We already covered the Quartodeciman controversy and the Meletian Schism. both of which involve other bishops reviewing the decision of the Bishop of Rome. Not only do they review it, they reject it, and in the case of the Quartodeciman controversy, they reprimand the Bishop of Rome. Let's jump ahead a little bit. Let's go to the third ecumenical council, the Council of Ephesus. I'm just going to read the synopsis out of the Percival book here. Before the third of the ecumenical synods was called to meet, Pope Celestine had already convicted Nestorius of heresy and deposed and excommunicated him. When subsequently the synod was assembled, and before the papal legates had arrived, the council met, treated Nestorius as in good standing, entirely ignoring the sentence already given by Rome, and having examined the case, after summoning him 3 times to appear that he might be heard in his own defense, proceeded to sentence Nestorius, and immediately published the sentence. On the 10th of July, more than a fortnight later, the papal legates having arrived, a second session was held, at which they were told of what had been done, all of which they were good enough to approve of. So let's bring this back to the Roman Catholic jurisdictional claim that the authority of the See of Rome is unsurpassed. What on earth do you have to gain by having an ecumenical council if you have already a decree from the See of Rome? I thought, according to the Roman Catholic teaching, that the See of Rome is unsurpassed in authority. Yet here in the Council of Ephesus, we see in law, this is the most harsh kind of review. It's called de novo review. De novo means that the appellate body that's looking at the case disregards all prior rulings on the issue and starts afresh. So what do you see the Council of Ephesus doing? They're doing a de novo review. They disregard the decision from the See of Rome and they start afresh. They consider the whole case from beginning to end on the merits. The authority of the See of Rome is not unsurpassed. It is surpassed. Also, it is subject to review. People review it all the time and reject or accept it. And in the case of the Quartodeciman controversy and the 7th Council of Carthage under Saint Cyprian and the Meletian Schism, the Nestorian controversy, it seems like Rome's jurisdictional claims are frequently surpassed. So that brings us up to right about the Council of Chalcedon. And I'm going to stop this video here, guys, because Chalcedon is a bit of a bigger topic. I think I'm going to make another video on, just Chalcedon, Vigilius, and Honorius, because I think each of those deserves proper treatment. They're like the big 3, right? But to sum up briefly here, the Roman Catholic teaching makes very specific jurisdictional claims as to the boundaries of the Pope's power. The Pope has immediate and ordinary jurisdiction over the whole church, even the individual churches, down to the individual shepherds and the faithful, when it comes to teachings on faith and morals and on disciplinary matters in the church. The Roman Catholic teaching claims that the decisions of the See of Rome are not subject to review by anyone, there are no appeals from the See of Rome, and that the See of Rome's authority is unsurpassed. Now, just taking a look at the procedural posture of these early controversies in Acts 15, in the Quartodeciman controversy, in the 7th Council of Carthage led by Cyprian, in the Rome-Antioch Schism over Meletius and Paulinus, in the 3rd Ecumenical Council. It is crystal clear that the Roman Catholic claims of the See of Rome being unsurpassed in authority and not subject to review by anybody, those are made up. The early church didn't believe that. And let's say they paid some verbal credence to it. Nobody acted that way. And when you do look at the verbal credence, there are counterexamples of notable church fathers like St. Basil the Great, using the same language of Antioch. So I don't know if you guys could tell, but I am very much enjoying this foray into Roman Catholicism. And you can expect to see many more videos on this subject, not just about Chalcedon, Vigilius, and Honorius, but also the 8th Ecumenical Council and various magisterial contradictions. I think there are some interesting points that need to be made from there as well. I know a few of you in the comments have asked for my analysis on the non-Chalcedonian position. It is in the pipeline. There is a lot of momentum right now with this Roman Catholic material that I've been producing, but I have not forgotten about you. It is on the way. If you guys like this video, don't forget to like the video. If you think it was stupid, leave a comment below and tell me why you think it was stupid. Share it with your friends and family. I hope I wasn't too abrasive. There's only so much a man can take when you have all these comments that are missing the point. I'm also meeting with my spiritual father tonight. He has some interesting things to share from how God has worked in his life. And of course, after sharing a few of his stories, we'll go on to a few Q&A questions that you guys have left on the post. Thanks again, everyone. Don't forget to keep your prayer rule today. Bye-bye.